So there's two major areas of concern, or two big culprits that can take anybody's healthy thyroid gland and absolutely destroy it. And I want to just kind of say a little preface here. 99% of everybody born on planet Earth has a healthy, normal, functioning thyroid gland. If we did not have it, we would really be suffering. And if you have some form of hypothyroidism, you know just how important a healthy thyroid gland is. I mean, it gives us our hair, the ability to digest food, mental clarity, energy to do things. You know how important it is. So just understand that most of us actually were born with a strong, healthy, functioning thyroid gland. And there's these other environmental factors that can take even a healthy thyroid gland and influence it chemically downstream that would make us present as if we had hypothyroidism or we had a sluggish thyroid. And we're going to talk about that. The first culprit is actually stress. Stress, I think it's almost a cliche to say that. I think most of us intuitively know now that if there's anything wrong going on in our body, somewhere that there's some random form of stress. In this particular case, I'm not talking about a random form of stress. I'm talking chemically how our body responds to any stress, or whether that's emotional stress, psychological stress, spiritual stress, or physical stress. Our body creates a chemical cocktail that gives us the power to overcome that stressor of whatever type. And we know chemically how that absolutely can destroy a healthy functioning thyroid and make us seem like our thyroid doesn't work at all. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to focus mainly on that in this video, because in order to bring about true healing, true recovery of hypothyroidism, regardless of the kind, we have to balance or bring about a buffering component on how our body chemically responds to any type of stressful event, which is automatically going to start bringing to balance culprit number 2, which is an out-of-control, undereducated immune system. In this particular case, with regards to our thyroid gland, we call it Hashimoto's, which is like an autoimmune condition related to our thyroid gland. Basically gives us hypothyroidism and all the symptoms associated with it. So if we can balance our stress component, or how our body chemically responds to stress, we will automatically start making our immune system behave a little bit better and giving it a little bit more education. So that was a long little preface. Anyway, let's get into it. So how does stress chemically destroy our thyroid gland? Even if it's healthy, we can still present as being hypothyroid or having a really, really sluggish thyroid, even if it's healthy. And this is how. So when we have, an environment of stress, and if you're like me, I live in the United States, and most of it is go, 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 go. My body, if it's not balanced, will totally respond to that, as it should, as it was built to, by producing a large amount of cortisol. And cortisol is actually good. Cortisol is that stress hormone, that stress component that I think most of planet Earth is familiar with. It's awesome. It gives our body instant access to energy. It allows us to breathe deep. It gives us mental focus and clarity, and allows us to get the job done. The only thing is, it's meant for a job at a time. And if you live in a industrialized nation like me, it's not job, it's jobs. Always doing things, just go, 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 go. So what happens is, it's very, very easy. Our cortisol levels can just slowly rise. And we get new normals of cortisol levels and new normals of cortisol levels as it slowly rises. What eventually happens in our body, we've developed this state, it's called cortisol resistance, where our cells are just no longer sensitive to normal levels of cortisol. Our body has to pump out so much more to get any of those effects. Then the problem is, when we have high cortisol levels, this cortisol creates a cascade of events that destroys our thyroid gland. Starting with the first cascade, which is it can increase estrogen levels. So when estrogen levels increase, a hormone also increases in response to that estrogen level. It's called thyroxine binding globulin. Thyroxine is that stuff that is basically T4 that eventually, if everything goes good, turns into T3. And this T3 that gives us all the wonderful benefits of a healthy, normally functioning thyroid gland. Anyway, this binding globulin basically takes thyroxine and deactivates it. So right away, even if our thyroid is healthy, because we have higher levels of estrogen that we shouldn't have, we're binding automatically more of that thyroid product, that thyroxine that we produce inside of our body. Not cool. That elevated estrogen level also increases our adipose tissue, or the fat cells of our body. When we have more fat on our body, we make more estrogen, which makes more of that thyroxine binding globulin. I know that's a mouthful. I'm trying to keep this easy and simple. Anyway, more of that thyroxine binding globulin, so it makes our thyroid gland not seem to work so good. Furthermore, let's say some of that thyroxine makes its way to our liver. And just in case you don't know, the bulk of all the magic of our thyroid gland happens in our liver. Our liver makes an enzyme called deiodinase that takes the T4 and converts it into T3. That's how a healthy functioning enzyme works, but with elevated cortisol levels, it doesn't quite go that way. High cortisol does something to that converting enzyme, and it still turns T4 into T3, but in this case, that T3 is now, it's been changed a little bit, and we call it reversed T3. In other words, completely inactive T3. So just to recap, high cortisol levels creates more of that thyroxine binding globulin, making our thyroid thyroxine inactive. While at the same time, that high elevated cortisol level totally destroys any benefit we would get of thyroxine making its way to our liver and converting it from T4 into T3, but instead high cortisol makes high reverse T3, which is bad. It makes our thyroid function even less, even if it's healthy. Furthermore, we have to have a good thyroid to be able to absorb certain minerals. Basically, our stomach acid, some of that production relies on our thyroid pumping out the healthy levels of T3, or our liver pumping out the healthy levels of T3 to create that stomach acid. That stomach acid helps to leach out certain minerals. I think for our thyroid, most of us have heard that, let's say, iodine is really, really good for us, because that's what T4 and T3 is basically made out of. And then maybe fewer of us have heard that selenium is also good for us because it helps in the enzymatic conversion of T4 into T3. But there's two other minerals that are just major contributing factors to whether or not we're going to get any benefit from our thyroid gland downstream in our liver. They are zinc and magnesium. So because we have such high elevated levels of cortisol, our stomach is not digesting any food, which means we're not leaching out those minerals. If we are zinc deficient, that deiodinase enzyme, we're going to lose the efficiency of that enzyme by 60%. So you could have the healthiest thyroid ever in the world, but if you have a zinc deficiency, you just lost 60% of that converting potential. Now, if we happen to have any type of deficiency in magnesium, again, we're going to lose another 40% of whatever converting potential of that deiodinase enzyme, that converting enzyme, which is bad. So we just from high stress levels, high cortisol levels, we're binding up our thyroxine, we're making more reverse T3, not the active form of T3, and we're losing the ability to absorb the minerals necessary for a healthy functioning of that enzyme to even work. So all of this just is like a snowball effect, and it just absolutely over time destroys our thyroid gland. Our thyroid gets these messages by our body like, hey, you're not making anything that you should be making. And so our thyroid starts just pumping out as much thyroxine like as it can, but in our liver, nothing is happening. If any of that thyroxine actually gets to our liver, by the way. Anyway, so this is like a nightmare. We got to throw a big monkey wrench in to stop this feeding, the self-sustaining cycle of thyroid destruction and get it back on track so that we can also start focusing on the immune system component. Anyway, so what to do about this? The first thing that we have to do is get on something that is going to help our body start being able to control the amount of cortisol it is producing. There's two herbs, natural herbs, that do just this. Number one, it's rhodiola, and number two, it's eleuthero, or Siberian ginseng. Both of them go inside of our body, and they start buffering the amount of cortisol that we make. And basically, they allow us to make cortisol, but the interesting thing is, once cortisol goes above a certain threshold, it starts mitigating any negative effect that cortisol would have on our body, such as causing estrogen to skyrocket, or causing us to gain weight, or break down muscle tissue, whatever. They both have that buffering effect. Eleuthero, or Siberian ginseng, has a little bit stronger cortisol buffering effect, which is awesome for us. Now, rhodiola focuses a little bit more on boosting mood and like an opportunistic, joyful feeling. Cortisol helps us balance some serotonin levels a little bit more, and dopamine levels, the feel good and feeling concentration hormones in our body, neurotransmitters in our body. Because if your thyroid's not working, not only do you not have any energy, but you probably feel like crap too. So a combination of these two guys, the rhodiola and the Siberian ginseng, I've just found that worked really, really good with buffering those high cortisol levels and helping to be slight mood lifters. They work really, really good. Now, obviously, in the meantime, we also need to focus on supplementing with those two minerals, zinc and magnesium. Absolutely fundamentally important for our body's use, being able to utilize any of the thyroid products we can produce naturally. We have to have zinc and magnesium. Now, if there's any congestion, any inflammation, any sluggishness in our liver isn't going to be able to convert the 80% of its responsibility of thyroxine or from T4 into T3. We got to protect our liver. We got to make sure that it is not being inundated with toxins and being inflamed from them, damaged from them, just any type of environmental toxin you can think of. We want to protect our liver. There's two mushrooms that I have found that I absolutely love that can do this. You can use either one. They're called chaga mushroom and cordyceps mushroom. Both of them have a very, very powerful liver protecting effect. They help our body deal with inflammation a lot more and just help our liver stay protected. And they're awesome for helping to decongest a sluggish, slow-moving liver. So these things right here are like the top 3 things to do in order to bring about the beginnings of balance with our body. Now, for just an estrogen over-dominant state, there's something else that's called DIM, diindolyl methane, and it's going to help our body metabolize and get rid of so much excess estrogen of our body. So all these things work in unison with one another, but they don't necessarily work in 2 hours. 24 hours, you got to be on these for several weeks before we start really experiencing the results, really feeling better. But DIM, diindolyl methane, it's a cruciferous vegetable extract. It helps our body kick out some of that extra or toxic estrogen levels. We do these 4 steps right here. That puts us on a track to help start balancing our cortisol levels, feeding our enzymes with zinc and magnesium, making sure our liver isn't so congested. We're protecting it a little bit more with those medicinal mushrooms and any excess estrogen that happens to be in our body, whether it's naturally produced or some xenoestrogen. These 4 things I have just experienced to be very, very powerful for helping to bring about and freeing up some of the downstream metabolic blockers of a healthy thyroid gland, and they actually allow it to work better. Anyway, hopefully that wasn't too much. We wish you all the success in the world, and we really do wish you well. And as always, cheers.